Sorry, we're not done yet. Now we leave the ancient Mediterranean and travel west to review sacred spaces in the Indigenous Americas. For this review lecture, I'm going to proceed chronologically rather than focusing on specific geographical regions. Up first, Chavin in the highlands of Peru. The plan on the left is our required work, but I think the model from the Khan Academy article is clearer. The location of this temple complex made it a convenient pilgrimage site. While high in the Andes Mountain, it's close to two mountain passes that allow access to the coast to the west and to the Amazon jungle to the east. It's also near the confluence of two mighty rivers. The temple interior was riddled with dark tunnels and galleries. Archaeologists now think that the tunnels and overhead vents would have created rather dramatic acoustic and lighting effects, and that in turn awed worshippers. The 15-foot Lanzone stela portrayed the temple's god, a supernatural fanged man-beast. It may also represent either a spear or a digging stick used for planting and harvesting potatoes. A carved channel runs from the top of the stela to the figure's forehead, and it may have been designed to receive liquid offerings. The same fanged man-beast appears on this relief sculpture, another required work. The frieze demonstrates a common feature of the art of Chavin, contour rivalry. An image may be viewed as depicting one figure, but if the image is flipped or turned, the same lines that formed the previous image now create an entirely new design. And this may signal a fascination with spiritual transformation, perhaps even a tie with the tradition of shamanism. Here's a clearer example from a famous Chavin artifact that's not, for some reason, one of our required works. The red circles here in Mesa Verde identify kivas. And here's a close-up from the Khan Academy article. We don't really know how these spaces were used by the Anasazi or ancestral Puebloan peoples, but we do know that kivas remain ceremonial spaces for Pueblo peoples to this day. On to the Maya. Yaxchilan is a Mayan complex that contains 3 acropolises, or hillside temple sites. Here's one of the required works from the complex, and here are the other 2. I've already talked rather extensively about the image of Lady Jacques and Shield Jaguar, and noted that these buildings were probably constructed to reinforce this dynasty's legitimacy. We don't actually know the purpose of these structures. They may or may not have been temples. The lintels depicting bloodletting ceremonies certainly signal a tie to the gods, but also, of course, to power and authority. The top of the structure on the left is called a roof comb. Functionally, the space between the stones lightens the walls and enables them to go higher. They're really kind of like fancy headdresses for buildings, increasing the apparent height, proclaiming power, and grabbing attention. And you've already seen that headdresses feature prominently in the ruling elite's wardrobe, right? Buildings constructed this way would necessarily be small and dark, inner sanctums for gods, rather like the garbhagriha of a Hindu temple. Elaborate public ceremonies, religious and political combined, would take place outside the temples, which is easy enough in warm climates. Remember that this was true of Greek temples as well. So there's a great deal that we do not know about this 1,300-foot earthen mound shaped like a serpent, but we do know that many native cultures in both North and Central America attributed supernatural powers to snakes or reptiles and included them in their spiritual practices. This may also be another site that it was used for astronomical observation. The head of the serpent aligns with the summer solstice, sunset, and the tail points to the winter solstice, sunrise. And there are several other astronomical theories, but the bottom line remains that we don't really know. The Mexica or Aztec Templo Mayor was located in the sacred precinct at the heart of the city. The capital was also divided into 4 main quadrants, with the Templo Mayor at the center. This design reflects the Mexica cosmos, which was believed to be composed of 4 parts structured around the navel of the universe, or the axis mundi. Again, we've seen that before. Here's our required image, which is a reconstruction drawing. Note that Mesoamerican pyramids were usually step pyramids, with temples on top. 2 temples for the Aztec or Mexica, 1 temple for the Mayan. But So these are more akin to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia than to the pyramids of ancient Egypt, but they did serve as burial structures as well as platforms for ceremonials performed in the temples, high up where the crowds assembling in the plazas could see them. Archaeologists have actually discovered several layers of pyramids, each built one on top of the other. Two grand staircases access twin temples which were dedicated to the deities Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. By the way, my pronunciation of this is going to be terrible. Tlaloc was the deity of water and rain and was associated with agricultural fertility. Huitzilopochtli was the patron deity of the Mexica, and he was associated with fire, warfare, and the sun. Paired together on the Templo Mayor, the two deities symbolized the Mexica concept of burnt water, which connoted warfare, the primary way in which the Mexica, of course, acquired their power and wealth. The most famous object decorating the Huitzilopochtli temple is this monolith, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, found at the base of the stairs. Originally painted and carved in low relief, it is approximately 11 feet in diameter, so it's huge. The monolith relates to an important myth, the birth of the Mexica patron deity, again Huitzilopochtli. His mother, Coatlicue, became pregnant one day from a piece of down that entered her skirt. Her daughter became very angry, that's the Coyo whatever, and together with her 400 brothers, she attacked their mother. At the moment of the attack, Huitzilopochtli emerged, fully clothed and armed, to defend his mother. The god defeated his sister, then beheaded her and threw her body down the mountain, at which point her body broke apart. It is this broken and degraded and naked image that we see on the stone. Remember, naked enemies are a sign that they've been defeated. During ritual performances at the Templo Mayor, war captives who had been painted blue were killed on the sacrificial stone, and then their bodies were rolled down the staircase to fall on top of this monolith, thus reenacting the myth. For the enemies of the Mexica and the people that Mexico ruled over, this ritual was a powerful reminder to submit to Mexica authority. Here are our last two Aztec or Mexica images. The Olmec were, of course, a much earlier culture, almost 2,000 years earlier, but clearly the Aztec revered this image, which, by the way, is very small. The basalt calendar stone is filled with iconography, including fire serpents whose heads meet at the bottom of the stone. We see two faces emerging from the mouths. In Aztec cosmology, this was related to the passage of the sun. And here's a screenshot from the Khan Academy video which shows that the calendar stone depicts leading Aztec gods. Again, we see worship of the gods and understanding of time closely intertwined. Whew, this is almost too much to take in. In Cusco, as in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, religious and political authority were combined and mutually reinforcing. Inca rulers and their nobles resided in Cusco, but so did local rulers from all over the empire. They were resettled in Cusco, in fact, to help keep their home populations under control. They were hostages of sort. Girls and young women were drawn from across the empire to the capital to serve as cloistered aklas, chosen women. They weaved fine cloth for gods and nobles. They made corn beer for religious rituals. They served gods in shrines, and sometimes they were given to Inca favorites in marriage. Young men were also brought to Cusco to be educated and raised in Inca culture. The Coricancha was the most sacred shrine of the Inca, dedicated to the worship of the sun. While the Inca had many gods, they claimed descent from the sun, whom they called Inti. The Coricancha was the center point of the empire, and from it radiated imaginary lines called seques, which connected it to shrines throughout the Cusco Valley. After the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire, the Coricancha was one of many Inca shrines turned into a Christian church. The monastery and church of Santo Domingo were built around and on top of the original shrine, incorporating the old structure into the new one in a rather odd and curious way. So this was probably a fortress rather than a sacred space, but note the way carefully worked but irregular stones were fitted together. We see this in the Coricancha as well, and it turned out to be remarkable proof against earthquakes. When one hit, the church disintegrated, the Inca temple remained. And this, too, is really not a sacred space. It was a royal estate for the emperor. Note the observatory, however. It was used for astronomical observations, which always had a religious implication. In this culture, as in so many, astronomy and religion were deeply intertwined. Remember that the primary Inca god was Inti, the sun god. The Intihuatana, or hitching post of the sun, is a carved boulder located in the ritual area of the site to the west of the main plaza. Carved boulders of this type are found throughout the heart of the Inca Empire. It was probably used to track the passage of the sun throughout the year, part of the reckoning of time used to determine when religious events would take place, and performing therefore a function somewhat similar to the observatory. Well, that was not as brief as I'd hoped, but we have covered a lot of ground. Tomorrow you will watch my last review videos tracking at ridiculous speed the continuity and change in Western painting. We're almost to the finish line. Don't give up yet.